everybody. Welcome to yet another film flashback. This is Matthew, as always. Nick, as always, joined yet again by our great buddy, Matt Hudacs. This time, we have decided to flash back in honor of the 5th of May, Cinco de Mayo, to 1995's Desperado.
Yes.
It was as if the lights dimmed just for him.
They called him a loner.
You've heard stories of that man that carries a guitar case full of weapons. Find him and kill him.
I hope you don't think you can take someone like Ucho all by yourself.
Really?
They made the mistake of calling his bluff.
Is there something in the guitar case?
Desperado.
So glad to have you all joining us yet again. If you have not yet seen Desperado, you better come to your senses. Yo, this is Robert Rodriguez's movie. If you don't know Robert Rodriguez, again, you need to look him up. So this is the second of what is actually a trilogy of movies. Robert Rodriguez, closely aligned in people's memory and sometimes creatively speaking, and this is one of those cases, with Mr. Quentin Tarantino. Rodriguez is from Texas. When he made his first movie, it's called El Mariachi, and he made it for almost nothing. It was like $7,000. They shot largely in the border town just on the other side in Mexico. It's a Spanish language film. And this movie is what happens when that was a success. So that movie is like a course in how to make low budget, nothing movies. It's almost dated at this point because that movie was 92, I believe. So he's shooting before you could use cameras. This is before DV. This is before that kind of digital revolution we've all now experienced and that we're currently living in. So he was doing things like saving film by shooting the whole thing without microphones at all and all the rest. So that's El Mariachi. That's the first movie. Today, we are looking at Desperado, which is a direct sequel. The characters, especially El Mariachi, carried directly over, except now we've got real names starring in it. Mr. Antonio Banderas, Miss Selma Hayek, you've got Steve Buscemi. Mm-hmm. So guys, this movie is an action-packed, shoot-'em-up, fantastic, exciting film that never pulls any punches. What was your first impression on revisiting Desperado?
I loved it from the opening scene until the very end. Yeah, I loved it. You can categorize movies in two different ways. Like, is there your movie where you want a twist ending, or you want to, Academy, award movies, you want to be moved, maybe spiritually or mentally or emotionally, and then you have your other movies where you go, all right, you know what? I just want to have a good time for 2 hours. And from the opening scene, which is the most Tarantino-esque scene that's not in a Tarantino movie, you have Steve Buscemi walking in a bar talking about this guy. The opening scene is probably 8 minutes, if not longer, with Steve Buscemi talking to Cheech Marin. It's like, I watch those guys, like, I'd watch an entire 18-hole round of golf with just those two, and those characters just like beating around the bush is basically what they're doing.
It's a Western. And stylistically, it's just like the American Western, right, Matt?
It's absolutely a Western in like the 90s. It's a 90s Western is what it is. And I have to say, it also hits from the get-go. There's no moment where there isn't some kind of an action happening. Steve Buscemi telling the story, you're almost reliving it with him. And you're seeing the dread in Cheech Marin, but then you cut from that into like a gun battle, and then you cut from that into like a karate scene where two dudes are just brawling in a cattle ranch, and then back to more explosions. So it's never like the action is always just happening and going and going. And honestly, I have to say, this is definitely something where the director definitely makes it his own. In that whole like telling a story kind of way. I think it's very much strung along. And you see it in Tarantino films as well, where it's like, I'm going to tell you a story by telling you a story to start out with. And from there, the action just builds and goes. And it is like, there's not a moment where you can, it's almost, I think they're act breaks, but they clearly feel like, you know, the scene fades out and you can take a breath and you're like, okay, let's reset. Where are we?
Hudacs, I was going to disagree with you because I don't think there's much of a story in this movie, but I think what you're right about. So opening, I was going to totally disagree with your point, but now that I think about it, what they do in the first like 8 minutes is set up this guy. And then there's a great thing in cinema versus a book, which is like, show us, don't tell us, right? Like that's why we watch movies instead of reading books for the movie audience. It's like, yeah, instead of hearing about how much of a badass this guy is, just show us how much of a badass that he is. And so we get this like interlude, and I will confess now, I never saw El Mariachi, but it's this is a sequel to El Mariachi, and I believe Steve Buscemi's character basically explains the plot of El Mariachi, which is like, hey, FYI, here's this guy. He's a badass that carries guns and guitar. And what do we get for the other hour and 40 minutes is a badass guy carrying a bunch of guns and a guitar.
Oh, absolutely. Now, that's a huge risk to start out right out of the bat, is to tell you like, oh, this dude is badass. He's badass. He's badass. And then you show him. And he's like playing guitar with a kid. And you're like, okay, you have a huge reputation to live up to. And he steps into the bar in that first gun battle. And you're like, nope, you lived up to it.
Yeah, Buscemi in the bar is like, he's the trailer for the movie. He comes into the bar and he tells you why you should be excited for the next hour and a half. Yeah. And now there's plenty of plot and the characters are there. It's an action movie, so there's a lot of focus on the action, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing to the characters at all. They're just it's a little bit simplified. It's a little sort of quick story beats. And what I like about it that I would say I would compare it to like Westerns is that when you're in an environment, and I mean where the story is placed, the stakes are very high. When it's like live or die thing, when you're in like a situation, and they really describe these particular towns in this part of Mexico, and they really make it as if it's like everyone's just trying to live through another day. Then when it comes to like really textured backstory and love affairs, you don't need as much depth because the stakes are already huge. So I always remembered, I know this sounds kind of out of place, but I always remember when I first read Romeo and Juliet in high school, I was like, oh my gosh, what's up with these kids? And they just like, it's just two 14-year-olds and they fall madly in love and everyone's stabbing each other and stuff. But I got to be in it for a Shakespeare in the Park production one time of the summer, and we really like dug into the script, and I was like, yeah, they were like live young, die young. It was like they were involved in a turf war and you could die at any moment. So you just kind of lived passionately. Yeah. So the notion that we only need to know a couple of things. We know about El Mariachi. We know that the goons of this drug, kingpin guy killed his love, and they shot his hand as his fretting hand. Ooh. And so he can't play guitar as well. I'm ready to murder over that. I'm like, the woman, what? You can't play guitar? And I don't think you need a whole lot more than that, because what we're talking about is the stakes are already like at a 10 when we enter the story. So it doesn't bother me that the characters are a little thin as compared to what you might have in another movie. It's not what the movie's about. It's just an action movie about people in a desperate situation.
I have a note here that says, bad guy, why is he bad? And besides doing bad things, I didn't.
He killed Antonio Banderas' love.
He killed him
while he's going after him, and then he's also taken over this entire town and has this entire town selling drugs.
Yeah, so, when that little boy comes in.
And how is this a bad guy?
Well, I know he's a bad guy. I know that there's a drug thing, but I'm like, he's not a cartel. Like, really, but he's just like a bad guy that clearly runs a library and with Salma Hayek. Like, I get that he's bad, but like,
they use lots of voices as fronts, and I mean, once he starts saying things like, "Go out there on the streets, anyone you don't recognize, shoot them." It's like, okay, that's a bad guy.
That was a little mean. I saw where, you know who was originally, so this character's name that we're talking about, the bad guy, is Bucho. Do you know who originally they wanted for Bucho? Raul Julia.
Lambert?
Raul Julia. Yeah.
Oh, I would have loved that.
Of Addams Family fame.
That would have been so fun.
That would have been a good one.
But he was already having health issues, and not to go down a negative.
Probably he wasn't terribly young at this point. This came out in '96. He's probably shooting in like '94. Yeah, he probably wouldn't have been the youngest man in the world, and he is supposed to. Spoiler: look out if you want to watch this movie. He's supposed to be Antonio Banderas' brother. So I mean, he can't be like far apart.
All right, and I think that's something that, to believe that these two are brothers. That in fact, Bucho is the older brother of him. That is a bit of a stretch, but I feel like it's a Spielberg stretch. If you followed them in the story this far, then you gotta believe it this much.
What, you don't think they looked it?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
Banderas was born 1960. Joaquin, who plays Bucho, he was born in 57. He was 3 years older.
Yeah.
Wait, you didn't believe the age thing, or that they're actually brothers?
That they're actually brothers.
Okay, so having not seen this in quite some time, I had forgotten that they're brothers. That was a total surprise to me. I'm like, oh, that's right, they're brothers. That's right.
That's it.
Yeah.
No, but
I'm sorry. I do have to say, like, it is, but what it is a very simplistic twist that you don't see coming. That is set up beautifully. Like, he has, that he's looking for this guy, and you see who this guy is, and then he has a chance to shoot him, and he doesn't. And I love the fact that they're like, well, why doesn't he do it? Why doesn't he just shoot? Why doesn't? And it's not until another two scenes.
But you don't know what he is. Yeah. The audience thinks that he knows this guy.
Fighting this entire time, and then it's revealed at the end. I was like, it's so. What I love about this film is one of those films that it's like you forget about it, and then you see it on TNT one afternoon, and you're like, oh my God, this movie exists. That's right. This is so good because it's so simplistic, but the simplicity makes it so grandiose.
You could jump into any scene and watch this movie for sure.
Oh,
it's simple, but also like it's uncomplicated. Like, even if you don't, who the bad guys are, the guys that aren't talking, that are just getting shot and shooting at Antonio Banderas. Antonio Banderas is so handsome.
A lot of people in this movie just to get shot.
Yeah. So I think I was 12 or 13 when this movie came. I remember, like, man, I want to look like that guy. Like, he's got the long hair. Clay, you're wearing a Nirvana shirt. Like, Nirvana was big. Like, I'm like, how can I couldn't grow my hair out fast enough. I gotta get this thing going, man. So but Antonio Banderas, like, another funny thing I thought about this is obviously takes place in Mexico. Robert Rodriguez is Mexican. Salma Hayek is Mexican. I'm going like, oh, it's awesome that they actually got all these Mexican actors. I bet he goes back a long way with Antonio Banderas. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, actually, it turns out Antonio Banderas from Spain.
Yeah.
Not from Mexico at all.
Yeah.
And
well, he doesn't look exactly the same as everybody else, but it works out just fine. He plays it just fine. I mean, it doesn't come off as stranger at all to me. Now, again, I wonder what would happen. See, you know what I'm not qualified to say is whether or not his Mexican accent was any good.
Yeah.
I'm not. I mean, like, he didn't sound Spanish to me. Now, just what I remember from simple, meeting free people. There's certain real things that kind of give away the Spanish.
He
accent.
definitely spoke Spanish.
And it's not in there. Well, that's not what I mean. I mean, like,
Yeah.
certain ways to pronounce words. The way to pronounce S's and things like that. But I mean, I'm nowhere near qualified to say if he did a good Mexican accent. But I would love to. I would love
Can
to.
you imagine if he did just this Spain accent, like, hello, I'm from España, and he just had like the extra.
Well, I just gotta say, I'm happy we didn't watch like Nacho Libre.
Well,
We are also happy.
if you do it 2 episodes a week, we might go down that road.
But I do
Antonio Banderas, like this was to me. I mean, I guess it's arguable, but this to me is his breakout role. So prior to this, his break into the U.S. film market, he did have a part in Philadelphia, and he did have a big part in Interview with the Vampire, which is like all the hunks of the early '90s. You got Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, Antonio Banderas. So this guy like came up through the theater, and Antonio Banderas, for an action star that he became, was a very good actor. But this is what put him on the signs for really in the U.S. market from that point on. It was because of this movie, I would say.
And I have to completely agree with you. Watching this, it was like, oh yeah, I loved Antonio Banderas as an action hero. When he went on to do Mask of Zorro, I was like, yeah, duh, of course he would. But it's like after that, I wanted to see him do more. But I'm actually very happy that he's like the action films that he did. It's kind of like he's like, nope, I did them. Okay, now I'm moving on to other projects. And he doesn't end up doing something like The Commuter or like a Walk Through the Graveyard. Yeah, like
he did.
Yeah,
he did Expendables 3 late on, but yeah.
Right. But Expendables 3, but he didn't do like Expendables 1. So.
It is definitely true that we're talking about, looking back from where we are, we're talking about bona fide A-list movie star. And at the time, this is one of those things, if not, as you say, Nick, the thing that makes it so you go, this guy can hold a whole movie. And he really can. I mean, he's just endlessly watchable. And I love when we're talking about, well, it's a shoot 'em up action movie, and we talk about how the characters are kind of, you can describe them in a couple of sentences in terms of backstory and things like that. But he and Selma Hayek are so awesomely watchable. They make you believe that these characters are real. So whatever work they did as actors is really fascinating because they had to try to find a way to ground themselves in some kind of reality, even though this movie is so hyper real, it borders on like action parody. It's like it's this close to like Indiana Jones, almost past that into like a superhero movie, but it doesn't get there, and you feel interested in the characters, and part of that is absolutely these amazing, massive actors that at the time were on their way to becoming massive. This is part of how they end up in our memory. And so it's like phenomenal casting. And you can tell that it was clearly that both Rodriguez and Tarantino both liked some of the same actors. You see that, like, he's actually in 4 Rooms. You know that Tarantino movie?
Yeah.
He's in that movie this same year in '95. Like they clearly, and for people watching, Tarantino and Rodriguez are friends. Tarantino has a part in this movie as an actor. And if you've seen a lot of Tarantino, but you haven't seen enough Rodriguez, because maybe the last 12 years or so, he hasn't had as many big films where people are watching them. You'll probably watch this and think to yourself, it looks like a Quentin movie. But the fact is, it's the both of them they influenced each other as filmmakers. They were friends who.
I want to ask you guys, because you are both also actors. Okay. Where do you classify Quentin Tarantino's acting? Because in his films, there is usually a role for him. But it's like, it's this iconic role of like a character actor, but he's not a character actor.
All right,
he
so here's
kind
the
of
funny thing.
Plays himself in a film. He just kind of like drops himself into a film.
The Tarantino part in this movie was actually written for Steve Buscemi.
Yes.
And so Tarantino was there.
Oh, wow. That's perfect.
Yeah, and so once they found out they could get Buscemi. Yeah, his Buscemi's character is literally called Buscemi because they wrote it for a Steve Buscemi type. Yeah. It reminds me of the Coen brothers writing the Big Lebowski. The narrator of Big Lebowski, like, I don't know, a Sam Elliott type. Literally every time they narrate it. If you ever read the script of the Big Lebowski, it literally says a Sam Elliott type.
There is definitely that feel to these scripts.
And so, but the problem is, like,
this is called Pickup Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Antonio plays El Mariachi. They don't even say his name.
So they had Buscemi and Cheech Marin for 6 days each, because the budget was much. El Mariachi did it for $7,000, and this was $7 million, which $7 million is not a lot of money.
But then when you listen to Antonio Banderas, who's like, "Yeah, we have $7 million," he's like, "That was a small budget." And myself, I'm like, $7 million. I feel like I could get some stuff done for $7 million.
Sure. I know it feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can make a movie for $7 million, but the script better be fucking tight, for one, and two, like, any special effects are not gonna work. You really have to figure out, and I guarantee it's for them, the camera, and so I know Antonio Banderas did an interview where he said, like, he did all his own stunts, and it wasn't necessarily because he wanted to do his own stunts. The budget was low, and there was some stuff where he's like, well, I'll just do it. Because, they had only 2 stunt guys for the whole movie. And we've talked about this before, where we were talking about Ninja Turtles. The original Ninja Turtles, like, the budget's very low. And not only was it low, and they didn't want to spend money on stunts, because as a director, you're like, oh, yeah, we'll get a couple stunt guys. It'll be great. You know what happens for stunt guys? You know why they have insurance? They get hurt. Stunt guys get hurt all the time. And if you don't have the budget to, every rehearsal, for those of you listening that are not in entertainment, every rehearsal a stunt guy does, you get paid for it. And so if you're a director, you just try to plan. I've worked on low budget films like this where you're like, all right, we have one shot for this, because every time this guy falls off this balcony, we got to pay him like $2,000 or whatever.
There was a shot. There's a shot toward the end of the movie. I know we haven't really recapped the movie, but there's a shot toward the end of the movie once the other dudes with guitar cases show up, where there's a goon who gets shot and he falls off of the balcony. And I don't know if you guys are watching, but it looks like this dude literally hits the dirt road. Did you see what I saw? It looks like this guy falls on the actual ground from like the second floor. Oh, no, and I was
he's
like, is that
he might be dead.
There was like watching him do that stunt thing where they're like first facing the ground, and then when they get near the bag they like turn their shoulders. No, he just like hit the ground. I was like, it almost took me out to the moment. I was like, oh my god, is that
guy? You guys, I'm going like, what? First of all, why would he jump off the building in that moment? Because like it was he's already been shot twice. Then he jumps off to shoot like. But I was also thinking, is that Robert Rodriguez's cousin? Like, why would he do that? Or his agent, maybe? I don't know. Like,
well, I would have to guess that Rodriguez is probably a stuntman's favorite director, because he's like one take. As soon as if it's in the can, we got it. He's the kind of guy. He's like, hey, was it like in focus? They're like, pretty much. He's like, great, moving on, because he's always trying to just shoot as much as he can to make. So the reason why you can make this movie for a modest budget is because the guy running it is Robert Rodriguez, and his whole shtick was, how do you make the best movie you can for the lowest price? And his thing is,
real quick, Rebel Without a Crew. He literally made a book about it called Rebel Without a Crew.
All right, that's what to read.
That's right.
That's El Mariachi. Like, he just literally, he would have a shot where the guy's supposed to take the guitar case and throw it over a balcony, and then on the first take the guy would like not throw it far enough and it would kind of like fall, and he would go, I'm sorry, I guess we'll go again. He goes, no, that's fine, moving on, we'll do a close-up of you throwing it and I'll cut it. And just moving. And
so,
like,
all right,
that's how he gets that much footage for that little time.
So I think to tag
his nose in his head, I'm gonna cut there.
To tag along with that, Clay, it's huge, like, to have huge cojones of like to do La Mariachi and be like, dig it, to do that and be like, hey, here's this movie. And they're like, all right, here's $7 million, make it again. And he's like, I'm going to make a sequel. And it's not like The Evil Dead, where they do The Evil Dead and then they do The Evil Dead again, but with more money. He makes a completely new, he's like, nope, this is going to be the sequel. This is what we're going to do. He pushes it forward. He doesn't just redo the same movie.
And so it's still set up for another movie. It's set up. This is a trilogy. There is a third movie that Once Upon a Time in Mexico that doesn't get made for almost a decade later, but it does get made. But the end of this movie, it's all set up that there's clearly a bigger, badder boss that nobody ever sees. He's just on the phone at one point.
There was Tarantino was on set for this for a while, not just as an actor. He was on set as a producer or whatever. And so he's the one that pitched him on Once Upon a Time in Mexico while they were filming this movie. So before this was even done, Tarantino's already gone. He sees the big picture of the story unfolding, which makes sense why I didn't think the bad guy was he was bad, but it was very on a micro scale. He's not in this little podunk town in Mexico.
Darth Maul. He's not the emperor.
It's kind of when you get to the end of any season of Breaking Bad, you're like, okay, he's reached the nope, there's a bigger boss.
He's no Gus. Yeah.
There's always a bigger fish. That is 2 Star Wars prequel references. So I want to talk about a little bit more in general about what it is, since all three of us love this movie, it seems, and which is great. That's fine. I want to talk about some of the things that about why is it that this movie's good compared to other movies. So we already said, the cast really sells it. We talked about how Rodriguez has an eye and a plan before he ever starts shooting. I really thought that if you're going to bother to make what is essentially a stunt spectacular, there's so many guns in this movie. Can you imagine even daring to try to count how many bullets are shot in this movie? You would never get there.
No, death count 67.
67 bodies?
67 deaths. Yeah.
I thought it would be more.
Me too.
So the movie's really stylized, and I feel like that is why it really works. The script is written in a stylistic way. People don't talk exactly like real people talk. It's like I said about Shakespeare before. It's almost like whether too clever.
Yeah.
A little too clever, and it's that's fine, and there's really creative editing. The 90s was a fascinating time because we had all these people who had been making music videos. So MTV launches in 1980, and music video editing turns into commercials and cable TV and all that stuff. So that by the time you get to the 90s, you get movies that are coming out in the theater that are influenced by a new kind of editing. It's very quick. It's very stylized, and a lot of the action scenes and really the whole film here is built to have that flavor to it, where it's just supposed to be straight popcorn.
It moves.
Yeah, so, and it definitely hits the highlights that you're looking for in a Western. You're in an action film, them slow walking away from an explosion.
But I'd say
fast cuts, just all over the place.
Clay, you brought up, this is a perfect example of a movie. There's also a category movie of, if this was playing in a bar without the sound on, and there's some playing in the back, and you're like, oh, yeah, it works. You could watch this movie without hearing what they're saying.
It was on, yeah.
So I think that's also a big thing with the movie coming out in 95, and I think we talked about this a little bit before, is there was a lot of blockbusters in 95. So it's what makes this movie stand out? What out of all of, because you're against Jumanji, Braveheart, the Goofy movie, you're GoldenEye, you're talking about all these huge blockbuster hits. What makes this one stand out? What makes you remember it?
I think it's still watchable, and partly is even though it's full of action, what you will notice if you watch it is that there's no James Bond GoldenEye like we reviewed with you, Matt, last time. There's no tank chases. There's nothing. It's just it's all just gunfights done exquisitely well. It's like a course in how to shoot an exciting gunfight, and then you have I would say specifically Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek, who played their characters in a grounded, realistic way. For some reason, they have managed, because they're just really capable actors. I don't know. I would love to hear what their thinking was at the time. But when I watch it, I feel like they knew that the world they were in terms of the film, was crazy. They're throwing grenades down like the alleyway. And they make big fireballs, which grenades don't even do. And they're doing the slow walk away. And like the world they're in is so incredibly over the top. So they just played it very real and very grounded. The Antonio Banderas character of El Mariachi, like I mentioned before, I mentioned Indiana Jones. He gets hurt. He gets hurt a few times. And one of the recurring things in the film is her character of Carolina has to like stitch him up. She's like, you don't want to go to a hospital down here. And she does her best to like literally patch him up. So he's not a superhero. He's hurt all the time. And so they actually feel like real characters in a crazy situation. And like we say all the time, Nick, if the characters work, the movie works. If you believe the characters, then you believe the movie.
I'll add on to that, and to Hudacs, to answer your question, I think we're really getting our first look. Besides a couple small things for Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek, the U.S. audience getting introduced to these two characters. We're also in a very stylized movie, and I think the world that we're in is very we're in the lived-in Mexico, and like no one knows. It's a callback to classic westerns with characters we don't know, with actors that go on to become massive hits. Like they're very, very attractive, very good at acting. And so it might be a low budget, but it's a good story. And there's no doubt about it that they spent all their money on special, like the prop guns. So the prop guns, by the way, shot blood. That's how they got so much blood. But I think it's when you're thinking about something that like, if you take a risk, something creatively is probably a better idea than just try to go with the flow, right? If they try to make Judge Dredd came out the same year, if Robert Rodriguez tried to make Judge Dredd for $7 million or another movie similar, it'd be terrible. But if you take a risk and you make a movie that's stylized as much as this is with two very good actors and there's a lot of details that are very well done. Set deck is good. The stunts are good, even though it's low budget. Like, we got Cheech Marin, we saw Buscemi, and so even though they only had some of these guys for 6 days,
briefly, Danny Trejo, brief but memorable.
Doesn't speak a word.
I don't think he
doesn't have to
filming a movie. I think he should be Danny Trejo.
And so it's memorable to us because, I mean, I don't know about you, but just other things leading up to it, we hadn't really seen anything like it. It's what we want. We've seen a lot of action movies, but all of a sudden, dudes getting blown up, and then. It's
the movie many 80s action movies wished they were and failed to be. This is what they were trying to do and then didn't.
Absolutely, right. It's almost like like the Western meets the Spanish soap opera. That's really what it feels like. They meld together.
See, I want all the guys with the guitars at the OK Corral. Like give me the guy with the two miniguns and the guitar case, and the guy with the rocket guitar case. It's so memorable. Like everyone,
characters that don't say anything.
Yeah. So I sent a note to these guys where I said, whoever did the extras casting or just like. They cast it perfectly for the look of the film. And so you can't talk about the sets and everything without talking about the extras and stuff they cast, because everyone looks like they live there. They're from there. And then you get to the guys with the guitar cases, they don't have a single line of dialogue. Danny Trejo, who we all know and is now a big hit, has a taco restaurants in LA. Doesn't have a single line of dialogue in this movie. And he's very attractive. That's what makes this good. It's like the devil's in the details. Like I think Rodriguez knows that, and that's why he's an advocate of doesn't take a ton of money. If you have to spend, you have to spend it. But
so, is there any part in this film, because I really feel like it's streamlined down to every like nut and bolt that you need for this script? I don't think there's anything in this that you can cut out. Like, you can't cut out Steve Buscemi. You can't cut out Tarantino. You can't cut these things out because I feel like you've built this momentum that just keeps going, that you can't really cut any of these things out. But on the same hand, you can jump into this film at any point and be right up to cue.
Okay, I can actually disagree a little bit there because I loved the scene so Tarantino plays the character. We haven't done like any story recap at all, but it's okay because it's pretty much there. Tarantino plays a character that is a bag man for the drug cartel, essentially, for the drug kingpin in this town. And he shows up at a bar and he tells a long joke, which he obviously loved telling. And then he gets the guy he's with. He doesn't check out, so they shoot him in the head. But Tarantino's character works out, so they take him into the back room through the world's nastiest toilet, which is actually an amazing idea for a cover for the fake door. Like, no cop is going to go into that stall. It was a great idea. Just really smart. But anyway, while he's back there behind the fake door doing the drug deal, El Mariachi walks in, and he has no idea about the back room or the fake door, and he doesn't care about the money. He's just looking for this one guy named Bucho, and he ends up getting into a shootout, which goes on for minutes and minutes and is super elegant and exciting, and he kills everybody. And then he just leaves. But they actually shoot Tarantino's character in the back because they were like, well, the shootout started to happen a few minutes after you got here, so I guess you're the one guy. But there was no... to me, I was like, you could have told the same story where he showed up to the bar looking for Bucho and shot everybody. You could have done that without having Tarantino's character there at all, and the same story would have happened. So that character's in there, and that moment's in there, but it is irrelevant to the plot. It doesn't factor in at all. It's not like, oh my gosh, they killed that guy? That was really important. Because they killed the Tarantino guy, that means XYZ happened. No, he was inconsequential. He wasn't even there looking for the back room. It had nothing to do with the money.
Okay, so then it doesn't matter when you kill Tarantino. You could have killed him in the shootout. You could have killed him.
It didn't matter if he was in the movie at all in terms of plot. But like in terms of plot, he didn't. He could have just skipped it.
But it does because it shows that the how far-reaching this Bucho's fingers go as far as this drug trade goes. Is like, okay, now we know where his drug center is, like where these guys are coming. Like, he's probably going to come here. We didn't realize that in the bookstore, he's also doing the same thing. The little kid with the guitar, he's also doing the same thing. So I feel like it does set up.
The little kid with the guitar is there to expand El Mariachi's character, where he starts to identify with the kid, and then he gets extra mad when he realizes the kid is being used by the drug dealers to mule drugs, and that gives him extra reason to hate them. And you get that just really tender scene where the kid just wants to learn how to play guitar, and he wants to open up the Mariachi's guitar case, but he can't because it's full of guns. And then he's like, can you play me something? He's trying to show him, and Mariachi was shot through the hand, which is in the first movie, in El Mariachi. He gets shot through the hand. And it's like, so that is all building on this story of the character. So I understand why the kid is in the movie, because it helps us understand our main character, and it helps raise his... Basically. But the guy that Tarantino plays, the pickup guy, he's there to like tell a joke and to get a few more people shot. And in the end, it's like, we already knew that this was a hub for the drug guy. And if you wanted to tell that story, you could have told it in 10 seconds. You didn't need this
20 people they wanted for that role.
All right. Yeah. I'll give you that. You don't need the whole piss story. You don't need that whole joke. Absolutely.
What you also didn't need in terms of plot is you didn't need his two buddies to show up, other than to have a massive shootout. Because they show up. There's no story about who they are. They're just his two friends. They show up. The one guy's got a rocket launcher that you can cock like a shotgun, and he shoots like rockets out. And the other guy has the most impractical. I mean, I'm like, dude, if you
miniguns.
Rifle inside of that guitar case, take it out so you can like put it over
after that. And we're like, I want these.
Yeah. At what point does it become practical?
Those guys if you cut them out, the story is just as much as it ever was before. So those guys didn't move the plot along.
But I tell you what, those guys come in and I go, I'm in.
Yeah.
And then you see the first guy's got miniguns, and you're like, that's pretty sweet. And you know El Mariachi's got the guns. You're like, what's this next guy have in here? Like hot air balloon? I don't know. And then it's a missile launcher.
Just imagining if you showed me the script before you made the movie, I would have said, hey, Robert, what's the point of these characters? He goes, because if they show up, we're going to have this awesome fight scene. And I'd be like, all right, cool.
Oh,
right, there you go.
Yeah. So, $7 million? Yeah, no problem. Who should I make it out to?
I also love two things. One, that for $7 million, this is like a huge blow up movie. I was like, there's $7 million. Like that doesn't seem like enough to really make this film. So yeah, he definitely like stretches that money to make this like a blockbuster hit. Secondly, the whole storyline of adding the characters and having them shoot everybody up and everything like that. They were trying to get like under an R rating. So they had to cut out a lot from that last fight scene, and they were really struggling with like because they were shooting blood instead of using the squibs like you would normally do. So it's like we're trying to get into this right rating.
Which scene did they cut a lot from?
I thought it was the last scene.
Because I wanted to ask you guys about the very end. Did you guys want to ask about the very end? Where he kills. Yeah, I felt a little disappointed. This is another criticism. Like, so what happens is El Mariachi gets a chance halfway through the movie, roughly, to shoot the guy that he's been searching for, that he's only ever known by name, and he finally sees his face, and then he clearly has a moment where he recognizes him, although he doesn't explain why. And then Salma Hayek's character, who has just had everything taken away from her by this asshole. She's like, why didn't you shoot? And he doesn't explain. And then at the end, it's revealed when they show up at his compound that it's actually his big brother. And that's why he didn't shoot. And they have this discussion. But he's got like 12 goons with guns pointed at these two. And this guy, the bad guy, Bucho says he's not going to shoot Antonio Banderas' character, El Mariachi, but because he killed all of his men, turnaround's fair play. I can't look like a wuss. So he's going to kill Carolina, played by Salma Hayek, and he turns the gun on her, and before he can pull the trigger, Banderas pulls out hidden guns and shoots his brother dead. And what it does is it goes crash to white, fade to white, and then we're just suddenly they're out of it, and they've moved on, and they're like moving on with their lives, like no one's chasing them. And I was like, did you cut out a scene? Because there's like 11 people with guns pointed at him when he shoots the boss.
Yeah.
There's no explanation of how they got out of there. They just do, like, he shoots the dude and then it just does fade to white. And I'm like, wait a minute. You skipped a part. You skipped the part about how they got out of the bad guy's compound.
Not in the
Was
budget.
I the only one who
Not
knows
in the
about
budget.
that? So when you said they cut stuff, I'm like, did they cut like that whole scene? Because I felt like we lost a whole scene.
I think that was the scene that they did end up cutting because there was because it was so real. There was a lot.
It was a ratings issue, I think.
Yeah, ratings issue.
It was NC-17 on the first cut.
That doesn't surprise
Yeah.
So.
me. A lot of people get shot in this movie.
There's a lot of blood.
And she's naked. She's naked. Salma Hayek.
Yeah. I have to say the most unbelievable thing is that nobody would go into Selma Hayek's
Hey, good
live.
try. All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, better out.
I'm gonna get more. Selma Hayek.
The first trivia fact on IMDb is on the day of that scene, the entire crew, even people who didn't need to be there, were showing up to watch that scene. And people's like, can't be here. And so, like in the end, it was like literally nobody allowed in.
It was
somebody,
Robert Rodriguez and the script supervisor. I'm going like, what? Why does the script supervisor need to be in there?
Gotta take notes, continuity, bro.
Yeah.
But it was like that's what the crowd showed up. Like, yep, we're all gonna get to see this. And it was like, seriously, is this your first day? You don't get to hang out while she takes her clothes off.
Need more gaffer tape?
That's the first.
Antonio, do you need a stunt guy? Do you need a stunt guy for this one?
Stand in.
Yeah. Selma, do you need a stunt woman? Do you need?
So at this point, so this movie comes out in 95. At that point, horror movies were definitely years into the trope of trying to continue the story by the end to let you know that there will be a sequel. That was already a thing. Now, most other movies weren't in that habit yet. So people who watch Marvel movies, the MCU perfected how to like make a movie letting you know, don't forget, there's going to be another one, and then you're going to have to watch that to be continued. That sort of serialized kind of movie making. But back in 95, that's not how you made a movie. You finished up a story, and except, like I say, in the horror genre. But this movie purposely lets you know that there's a big baddie that you never see, but you are obviously fascinated by. And then they have like these couple of false endings where he repeats his line, "Did I thank you? No, I will." And he leaves. And it was like, that would be the end, except it cuts immediately to her following after him in the car. They get in, and he throws his guns away. That would be the end. But it's not. They back up so he can get the guns, and he's like, just in case. And it's like, there will be another one of these. There's clearly more, gunfight to do.
And this is way better than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, without a doubt. Or sorry, Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
In Mexico. Yeah. Johnny Depp's in that one.
Yeah.
That's my favorite out of the three, because El Mariachi is just its own thing. You got to watch it.
You know what?
But you watch
for those of you that don't speak Spanish, Desperado stands for desperate. I think if this movie was called Desperate, I would have a different memory of this movie.
Well, Desperado isn't the original title, is it?
No, they changed the title, and I don't have it in front of me. They wanted to be called. So El Mariachi stands for the gunman. No, they wanted this one to be called the Gunman too. Well, really, that's what I read. Well, listen.
The Pistolman is, I think, what something like that.
Or maybe they wanted this one to be called the Gunman. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
that's possible. Because you guys got to understand that in the character of El Mariachi in the movie El Mariachi, he was not a killer when the movie starts. The plot of that movie is that he's a guy who plays actual guitar but wears black, and there's some other guy who walks around wearing black and has guns in a case, and then this dude gets mistaken for that guy. And so he becomes caught up in a story where now he has to start killing, and so he's on a vengeance thing because it was very Hitchcock. It was the wrong man. He was an actual mariachi, and then they killed his love, and so he turned into a gun-toting crazy.
A tale as old as time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you're from Texas, Mexico border, maybe it is a tale as old as time.
I just pointed out Hudacs at one point said El Mariacha or La Mariacha.
I took French and
one
Latin.
shot of tequila.
Just three white people talking about Mexico.
That's all I got. I love this movie, and it was a great rewatch. I'm glad we did this one.
It was definitely great. It was definitely great to rewatch it because I think it's been so long since I've been able to watch it from start to finish. It's been a lot of picking it up here and there and then finishing it. So I greatly appreciate that this is the one that you guys wanted to watch.
Yeah. Classic.
Last. I was excited about it, and I'm excited for the next one. So, like we've been doing, we're going to probably keep this going with our Handlebar TV film flashback series, where we're doing our instant reaction to these movies.
What's next?
We have to choose something for Thursday, but we'll have another one coming out on Thursday. This one will be available in the morning, which will be Wednesday morning in podcast form, and you can obviously rewatch it. Tell anyone that they want to rewatch on YouTube. You just got to search Handlebar TV on either YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio. And so for myself and Mr. Nick, thank you very much, Matt, for joining us again.
Of course, anytime, guys.
I'll see you next time.